Hello and welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a quick look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is from India. A triple train tragedy in the country has left a series of questions behind. It is India's worst train disaster in decades. What happened in the minutes before the crash? What caused it? Who is to blame for the loss of lives? On Gravitas tonight, we piece together the developments, we tell you what we know so far and get you the bigger picture. Also on the show for you tonight, has Russia thwarted Ukraine's counteroffensive even before it started? We get you the claims and the counterclaims. America is fuming over a Chinese warship's unsafe interaction near Taiwan, quote unquote. We tell you what transpired. We also tell you all about a secret meeting of the world's spy chiefs, which is not a secret anymore. Scores of Afghan schoolgirls have been poisoned. We tell you what we know so far. It is Monday, the 5th of June, and India is still trying to come to terms with a tragedy that killed over 270 people. I am talking about the triple train collision. Who could have seen this coming? The driver of the Coromandel Express certainly did not. His train had left Howrah's Shalimar station, Kolkata, around 3:30 that afternoon. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, his train was speeding at 128 kilometers per hour. It was heading into the night. And soon, the train would enter the Bhananga Bazaar station in Odisha's Balasore district. For the loco pilot, there was nothing special about the night. There was not anything foul either. His train was one of the 22,500 plus others running that night. Just another night in the world's fourth busiest railway network. The loco pilot saw a loop line approaching. There was a green signal telling him that the path ahead is clear and it's safe. So he steered the train into another track, and soon it was all over. The loco pilot heard a sound that split the sky. He knew there was a collision. His train, the Coromandel Express, had smashed into a goods train that was stationed in a loop line beside the track. Before becoming unconscious, the loco driver told a railway official that he did receive the green signal. Around that time, the passengers were building their appetite for dinner. Many had already opened the tiffin boxes or their dabbas that had been so lovingly packed for them from home. The smell of home-cooked food and Indian pickle intoxicated the air. Some of those breathing it were going to Chennai in search for work and with the dream of saving enough to build a house. Chennai was another 22 hours away. There were families chatting away loudly, young children complaining, crying. Amidst it all, there was someone writing verses of love in his diary, when suddenly there was a loud sound. A series of loud sounds followed. The compartments hit one another. Some hit the goods train. Some were flung into a third track. Suddenly, it was all dark. people began falling on one another. There was screaming, cries for help. Many saw what they never thought they would: their loved ones dying in front of their eyes. But the worst was not yet over. On the next track, another train was passing through the accident site from the opposite direction. The Havra-Yeswanpur Express was 4 hours away from its final destination. Some of the passengers were catching a quick nap before they had to get down at the crowded Havra station and jostle their way through the crowd. The ticket examiner in one of the last coaches of the train thought he heard a loud and abnormal sound, as if something was approaching him. And the very next moment, people were thrown out of their seats. Some of the derailed coaches of the Coromandel Express hit this superfast train, derailing at least 4 of the train's coaches. 3 trains traveling on 3 different tracks found their fates colliding. To most passengers, that moment is a blur. The loco pilot of the goods train knows very well he would not have survived had he not stepped out of his station train for some inspection moments before the crash. And when it happened, those living nearby heard the screeching of the brakes, the sound of trains colliding and of disaster unfolding. They rushed to help. And when the day broke, rescuers found, among many other things, sheets of papers with poems professing love, scribbled in Bangla on a now torn diary. One of the lines read, "Little clouds lead to light rain, and little conversations to love." There is no word on whether the poet is still alive, or did he die in the tragedy without expressing his feelings to the woman he loved. What happened on Friday was one of the worst railway accidents in India's history. The death toll is nearing 300. Hundreds are still fighting for their lives in the hospital. The question is, whom do you blame? According to the preliminary reports, signal failure is the culprit. The train should have never been given the green light to switch tracks. But was the signal failure a result of human error, or was it a technical error? Was it a sabotage? There are no clear answers yet. The Railway Board is already probing the accident. India's Central Bureau of Investigation, or the CBI, is also being roped in. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to severely punish the guilty. The last time India saw a disaster of this scale was when an Indore-Patna train derailed in Uttar Pradesh, killing nearly 150 people. In 2010, another 150-odd people were killed when a train derailed near Kolkata. Authorities said the disaster was a result of sabotage. In 1999, 2 trains collided in West Bengal, killing 285 people. The year before that, 300 people lost their lives in a collision between 2 trains near Agra. India's worst railway dates back to India's worst one dating back to 1981, when over 800 people were killed after a train plunged into a river in Bihar. India's colonial-era railway has come a long way since. It has been modernized, expanded, upgraded. Today, India boasts of a 68,000-kilometer-plus railway network. Indian Railway ferries over 3,519 million people each year. It boasts of superfast trains, safe and improved infrastructure, and Wi-Fi-enabled railway stations. Over the years, railway disasters have significantly reduced in India, but it's also true that India still has miles to go. According to data from the National Crime Records Bureau, there have been, on an average, over 23,000 fatalities from railway accidents every year between 2010 and 2021. In 2021, for example, there were nearly 18,000 railway accidents, resulting in 16,431 deaths. Of these incidents, There were 88 collisions and 21 derailments. Together, they claimed 108 lives. Earlier today, another train derailed, again in Odisha. This was a goods train. Thankfully, no one was injured. Shifting focus for now. Has Russia thwarted Ukraine's counteroffensive even before it could start? This question is buzzing in Europe's corridors of power, courtesy the Russian Defense Ministry. On the 4th of June, it released this footage, which apparently depicts a major Ukrainian offensive in the Donetsk region. The visuals showing armored vehicles on the move as explosions hit some of the vehicles. Moscow saying this was a large-scale attack, but the Ukrainians could not achieve their goal. Listen to this.
On the morning of 4th June, the enemy launched a large-scale offensive in 5 sectors of the front line, the South Donetsk axis, deploying the 23rd and 31st Mechanized Brigades of the Strategic Reserves of the Ukrainian Army. Other regiments supported them. The enemy did not achieve its goals. It had no success. As a result of the skillful and calculated actions of the East Group, the Ukrainian army suffered losses of more than 250 people, 16 tanks, 3 armored personnel carriers, and 21 armored vehicles.
Now, how exactly do we view this attack? Did it represent the start of a long-expected Ukrainian counteroffensive? The much-awaited Ukrainian operation to recapture some of its territories? It could be, and if it indeed was, then this plan may have failed right at the start. Just have a look at the damages Russia claims to have inflicted on the Ukrainians. It says the Ukrainian army suffered losses of over 250 people, 3 armored personnel carriers, 21 armored vehicles, and 16 tanks. And these are not small numbers, especially if we speak of the tanks. You see, when the war started, the Ukrainian army had 800 active T-64 tanks. 14 months on, it has apparently lost around half of those tanks. If we speak of the T-84 battle tanks, Ukraine has just 5 or 6 copies of it. That's enough for just 1 platoon. The same story with the T-70 and the T-80 tanks. There aren't many of them left with Ukraine. My point is simple. Every tank Ukraine loses is probably a tank it cannot replace. And this explains why Kiev has been lobbying its allies hard for NATO-style tanks. And if Russia's claims are indeed true, if it actually destroyed 16 Ukrainian tanks, then this is a major blow to the Ukrainian army. Ukraine's silence on this further adds to the doubts. You see, on Sunday night, the Ukrainian president delivered a video address, but he made no mention of the alleged assault. Neither did Ukraine's defense ministry in any of its official statements. And interestingly, on the 4th of June, the Ukrainian military released this video. The aim was to discourage public speculation over the offensive, saying that it could help the enemy. The sleekly produced footage featured masked and well-armed frontline troops holding their fingers against their lips, gesturing for silence. The caption read, and I'm quoting, "Plans love silence. There will be no announcement of the start." Is the silence helping? That depends on who you ask, of course. The Russians say they have thwarted what might just be the beginning of Ukraine's counteroffensive. The Ukrainians are sticking to the silence, refusing to say anything on their gains or their losses. Interestingly, the only statements that are coming out are from unofficial bodies and organizations like the Russian Volunteer Corps, a pro-Ukraine group of Russian partisans. It says it has captured several Russian soldiers during a cross-border raid into southern Russia. And there are around 24 of them. By all means, this operation could not have been pulled off without the assistance of Russia's defense ministry. So at the end of the day, this is what we have. Russia countering a Ukrainian offensive, Ukraine saying no word about the losses, and pro-Ukraine Russians capturing Russian troops. This only indicates how after a brief lull, the battle has picked up again. The days ahead will be crucial, to say the least, for both the sides as they step up their operations. Moving on for now, tensions are running high in the Taiwan Strait. US and Chinese warships had a dangerous interaction. The US is angry. It has released a video of the incident. Take a look at this. The US and Canadian navies were conducting a joint exercise in the Taiwan Strait. America's guided missile destroyer Chung Hoon and Canada's frigate HSMC Montreal were carrying out a regular transit, and that is when a Chinese warship cut in front of the US vessel. As you can see on your screen, a Chinese warship is sailing across Chung Hoon's path in calm waters. In fact, it came as close as 150 yards. The American destroyer was forced to slow down to avoid a collision. You see, the Taiwan Strait is a sensitive area. China does not tolerate foreign presence here. The US and Canadian joint drills were a rare occurrence, and China decided to intervene. It claims America's move was a provocation. Chinese analysts had applauded the move. They say that the point-blank interception demonstrated China's courage and capabilities. Listen in to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin had to say.
As I have just said, the US side caused trouble and provocation in the first place, while the Chinese side dealt with it in accordance with the law. And the initiative taken by the Chinese army was completely reasonable and legal, as well as completely professional and safe. It is the US side that should reflect deeply and correct its wrongdoing.
Did you hear that? He says China's move was completely reasonable and legal. But how exactly? US and Canadian ships were in waters protected by freedom of navigation. For those of you who do not know this, freedom of navigation allows ships of any country to sail in international waters without interference from other states. Then how exactly is China's move justified? If anything, it acted like a loose cannon. And it's not me who is saying this. This is what the HSMC Montreal commander had to say. Listen in.
Maneuvering close to each other, 150 yards is very scary. And you don't ever want to be that close to another vessel, because too many things can go wrong and you can actually have a collision.
And this was the second such encounter in recent days. The first one took place in the air. On the 26th of May, a Chinese fighter jet intercepted a US military plane over the South China Sea. China's J-16 aircraft aggressively maneuvered the American RC-135 plane, throwing it off balance. The US is clearly not happy. The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, has condemned China for its pesky behavior. Listen in to what he said.
And what you've heard me say in the last several weeks, and especially the last couple of days, I've voiced my concern about the irresponsible behavior we've seen with close intercepts and the coercive behavior that we see in the waterways, and so that continues. So I call upon the PRC's leadership to really do the right things to rein in that kind of conduct, because I think accidents can happen that could cause things to spiral out of control.
And what was China's response? Of course, it was defensive and put everything on America. Listen to this now.
Some people are talking about our ships, our planes getting too close to their ships and their planes. But the real question is, why are they coming all the way across the ocean to our doorsteps? They are getting too close to our territories, to our territorial waters, before anything else. This is not a good way of showing respect to others. It's certainly a disrespect of other countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity.
And the timing of this encounter could not have been worse. Relations between the US and China had already been fraying. And when the US proposed bilateral talks with China on the sidelines of Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Beijing declined the invitation. And just a few days on, this is what the Chinese defense minister said at the Shangri-La Dialogue.
China has been seeking to build a new type of major country relationship with the US, but it requires the US side to show sincerity, match its words with deeds, and take concrete actions to meet China halfway, so as to push forward the stabilization of bilateral relations between the two countries and militaries.
So what is this, if not hypocrisy? You see, on one hand, China is asking the US to meet it halfway, and on the other hand, it is snubbing proposals for bilateral talks. So what really does China want? Why can it not make up its mind? Even right now, senior US diplomat Daniel Crittenbrink is in Beijing to mend strained ties, but the Chinese state media slammed the visit, claiming that the visit is a sham, that the US is simply putting on a facade, putting China in a bad light. Let me now ask you a question. What do India, China, and the US have in common? Well, besides the fact that India and the US have prevailing tensions with China, they also happen to be attendees of an annual spy meeting. That's right. Over the weekend, intel officials from India, China, and the US met in Singapore along the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue. This is an intergovernmental security conference which is attended by defense experts each year. And for several years, a secret meeting of spies has been discreetly held at a separate venue alongside the security summit. It is organized by the government of Singapore itself, but it has never been reported on. Not until now. And this morning, news networks around the world were talking about it. Reuters was the first to report on it. It said that senior officials from over 24 of the world's major intelligence agencies met on the fringes of Shangri-La. Over 24 of them. And if we speak of America, it was represented by Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, the first woman ever to serve in that role, by the way. And if we speak of India, it was represented by Samant Goyal, the head of India's premier spy agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, or RAW. There was no word on who represented China at the meeting. But what really was the aim? Only a few details are available on the specific discussions that took place, but reports say the agenda was preventing tensions from erupting on the dark side of intel engagement. And this is what an expert with the know-how of the meeting is said to have told Reuters on the condition of anonymity. Let me just quote. The meeting is an important fixture on the international shadow agenda. Given the range of countries involved, it is not a festival of tradecraft, but rather a way of promoting a deeper understanding of the intentions and bottom lines. Singapore's Defence Ministry has also issued a statement, by the way. Its spokesperson was quoted as saying, while attending the Shangri-La Dialogue, participants, including senior officials from intelligence agencies, also take the opportunity to meet their counterparts. The Singapore Ministry of Defence may facilitate some of these bilateral or multilateral meetings. Participants have found such meetings held on the sidelines beneficial. Now, here's the thing. Clandestine operations happen, and no one really admits them. But even in the game of shadows, the chiefs of spy agencies meet to establish the rules of the game, you see, especially during times of tension. Just have a look at what's unfolding right now. The war in Ukraine is at its peak. Tensions are bubbling in the Himalayas. There is a risk of conflict in the South China Sea. And at a time like this meeting should be seen as a positive sign, a step in the right direction. Media reports only reaffirm this. They say the tone of the meeting was collaborative and cooperative, and the talks were held openly and informally. And that said, meetings of the intelligence community are rare, and even if they happen, they are almost never publicized or talked about. Forget being covered in the media. Then why did this one make it to the headlines? Was this pre-planned? That is a mystery yet to be unraveled. Those living in Washington, D.C. had a rather eventful Sunday. Sometime in the afternoon, they heard military jets scrambling in the sky above. And as it turns out, F-16s were chasing a private jet that had entered the restricted airspace near the White House and the U.S. Capitol building. So what happened next? A high-speed supersonic chase in the skies. Our next report telling you.
A loud boom was heard in Washington, D.C. on Sunday afternoon. There was no bomb blast, explosion or fatal collision. Instead, up in the sky were F-16 jets chasing a private plane, a Cessna Citation, at supersonic speed. The notorious plane had taken off from Tennessee and it was bound for New York. The plane's flight path shows that it crossed its intended destination and had begun flying back towards Tennessee. Why? No one knows. During the course of its flight, the jet entered the restricted airspace over the White House and the US Capitol. This prompted an emergency response. The FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, called the plane's pilot, but there was no response. So 2 fighter jets took off from Joint Base Andrews to intercept the plane. They tried to chase down the private plane at a supersonic speed, producing the boom. The sound shook homes in Washington, D.C. It could be heard as far as the suburbs of Virginia and Maryland. This napping dog, for example, was taken by surprise during his siesta. In case you didn't know, a sonic boom is caused by an object moving faster than sound, around 1,200 kilometers per hour. People living in and around Washington, D.C. rushed to Twitter to share their experience. This one person asked if the sound was from a meteor exploding in the atmosphere. Another said he felt the pressure wave in his chest. Someone joked on Twitter that he thought the boom was a result of the US debt ceiling collapsing. So did the F-16s manage to catch up with the private jet? No. After crossing DC, the Cessna began descending rapidly and crashed into a mountain in Virginia. US officials made it a point to clarify that the F-16s did not cause the crash. So what did? And who was in that flight? The Cessna jet was owned by a Florida-based company. Its 75-year-old owner said his daughter and 2-year-old granddaughter were on board the plane, along with a nanny and the pilot. The mother-daughter duo were returning to their East Hampton home after a visit to North Carolina. So why did the plane take a U-turn? Why did it enter the restricted airspace and come dangerously close to the White House? And why did the pilot not answer the FAA's call? Officials say the plane meant no harm.
Time now for some Monday motivation. This story is about Iranian women who are defying all odds in the ice rink. Iran's female ice hockey team has won a silver medal in an international tournament. The match was broadcast live on Iranian national television. We are talking about a country which does not even allow women to watch men's football. Tonight, we get the stories of these Iranian women. How did they achieve this massive feat? What were the struggles like? Amid protests for basic women's rights, a team of sportswomen have shown perseverance and courage. The Iranian female ice hockey team standing out as an example for aspirants, a story of inspiration. The Asian Ice Hockey Championship was a challenge for the players, but they came through, they excelled in an environment where the other competitors had a lot more experience. Iran went up the ranks to achieve the silver medal. Let's just remind you here, this is a team which did not even exist 3 years ago. Iran did not have a single international standard ice rink before the year 2019. In fact, reports show that majority of Iranians did not even know about the sport existing. Despite the constraints and the hurdles, the female ice hockey team's win has turned heads around the world. The Iranian team beat several countries to grab the victory. Kyrgyzstan, Kuwait, Singapore. In fact, experts say that the Iranian team's success is absolutely unprecedented. The female team achieved another incredible milestone. The match was broadcast live on Iranian national television. The players say that this would encourage the sport even further. Will this win have a bigger impact on the society, though, is the immediate question. Experts say that Iran should take this as a prompt to promote women in sports. It should not see this as a threat to Iran's male hegemony. That this could be the start to women advancing in various other fields. The government has so far reacted positively. The sports minister, Hamid Sajadi, has congratulated the players. The female team's expenses have been reimbursed and they have also been given out bonuses. Although there are political and societal barriers, a series of complications, the team says that with proper training, it will dominate the sport within 1 year. And this attitude may help Iranian women continue to aspire to achieve bigger dreams. Even though women get battered with a mountain of restrictions in Iran, the female ice hockey team's win has come as a ray of hope. Meanwhile, let's tell you what else is happening. In the circuit of America's most successful companies, women can be seen capturing a significant share. There are 52 female CEOs in this year's Fortune 500. And this is a level up from the 44 CEOs recorded last year. Although the growth is comparatively slow, women now dominate over 10% of the biggest businesses. So which woman CEO is at the highest rank? It's the CEO of CVS Health, Karen Lynch. The company is standing at 6th on the list with $323 billion in revenue. In simple terms, Lynch has made history. CVS is the largest company in history to be helmed by a woman without taking gender into regard. Lynch is one of the most powerful CEOs in the world right now. And who are the other women CEOs? Some of them are the CEO of Cummins, Jennifer Rumsey, American Electric Power CEO Julia A. Sloat, the CEO of Reliance Steel and Aluminium, Parker Hannifin CEO Jennifer A. Parmenter, and the CEO of Open Door, Carrie Wheeler. So why exactly is the Fortune 500 even considered important? You see, the 500 companies on the list represent $18 trillion in total revenue. This is more than 2/3 of America's GDP. The list is a view at the view of the American business world and the female CEOs showing the gender diversity to a certain extent in executive leadership. And this, of course, represents the importance of women in top positions and leadership roles. You might think of CEOs as people who are always hungry for profits. Although that might be a part of their job, the women CEOs say they want to provide better care as they get bigger. And this attitude may have led to the hiring of the 12 women CEOs in the past year. The CEO of Accenture, Julie Sweet, has urged the growth of diverse leaders. She says that such leaders will hire diverse teams and boost innovation, especially in the era of artificial intelligence. CEOs are calling for reinvention, adaptability to push for growth. And Fortune 500 has also recorded another sign of diversity. There are more black CEOs than ever before. Although there are only 8, it can be seen as a fair sign of growth. Fortune 500 has featured the CEO of Curate Retail, David Rawlinson. He is on the list of future star CEOs. The list features CEOs who may lead larger companies in the future. Now, will we ever see women dominate the business world? The answer lies with the new women CEOs and their push for diversity. And you see, while women around the world are making history, the story is a lot different in Afghanistan. The Taliban ruled Afghanistan, which has no mercy for women. As you might already know, teenage Afghan girls are barred from schools, but all the scrutiny could not stop many of them from seeking education. So what did the perpetrators of hate do? They seem to have taken notes from Iran. Some 77 Afghan girls have been hospitalized due to poisoning in 2 separate attacks. What exactly happened? Let's first tell you about the attacks. They took place in Saripul province. Some unknown people broke into 2 elementary schools. They entered the classrooms and carried out the poisonings. The nature of the poison has not been discovered yet, but if we were to go by the history, it could be a gas attack. 60 girls were poisoned in Naswan-e-Kabod Ab school. 17 others took a hit in neighboring Naswan-e-Faizabad school. All this for what? Just for seeking education? For something that was well within those girls' basic human rights. Women of Afghanistan have been suffering for a long time. And now incidents of poisoning like these, of poverty, of hunger, these are the ones you can easily see. But then there are crises that are not so obvious to the eye. I'm here to tell you all about it, about the crisis of mental health in Afghanistan. It's being called a pandemic of suicidal thoughts. Afghan women riddled with mental health problems, they are crying out for help. This report saying when the Taliban announced that women could be banned from universities, psychologist Dr. Amal received 170 calls for help within 2 days, and these girls suffered from depression and anxiety. They were concerned about their bleak future. Many even wanted to kill themselves. On an average, Dr. Amal gets roughly 7 to 10 such calls every day. Afghanistan has been ravaged by 4 decades of war. The UN estimates that every 1 in 2 people, most of them women, suffered from some sort of psychological distress. This was before the Taliban took over in 2021. And things are now way worse than before. One young girl killed herself the day schools reopened in March. Up until that day, she had some hope, but her worst fears were confirmed when girls were not allowed in. Another one in her 20s turned to suicide because she was not allowed to sit for university entrance examinations. She wanted to become a doctor. She wanted to serve her country. These were the stories of the students, some of the students. What about the teachers? Well, they did not have it any better because when the Taliban closed universities for women, female teachers were not excused. A teacher tried to kill herself twice. She was the breadwinner of the family and lost her job. The list goes on and on. There are hundreds of such stories, tales of horror, women whose lives came to a grinding halt. All thanks to the Taliban. What exactly is the suicide toll? Who knows? Because it's Afghanistan we are talking about. Psychiatrists are not allowed to record or access suicide statistics. But there are some reports we can refer to. According to the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, about 3,000 Afghans attempt to take their own lives every year. Globally, there are more male suicides than female suicides. But in Afghanistan, about 80% of suicide attempts are by women. The World Health Organization estimating more than 1 million Afghans suffer from depressive disorders. There isn't one reason, but several. Violence against women is widespread. According to the United Nations Population Fund, 87% of Afghan women have been victims of physical, sexual, or psychological violence. 62% have experienced multiple forms of abuse. Forced marriages are prevalent. Many are married before their 18th birthday. Amid this suffering, what else do you expect? Of course, Afghan women are grappling with mental health issues. Afghan women urgently need help. But will they ever get it? And our next story is about a mother who spent 20 years behind bars over the deaths of her 4 children. And she has now been pardoned. She was released from a prison in Australia's New South Wales state. What is her story? Why was she jailed? And 20 years on, what led to her being pardoned? Our next report telling you.
This is Kathleen Folbig. She is 55 years old and has spent the last 20 years of her life in prison. She was jailed over the deaths of her 4 children, but now, after spending 2 decades behind bars, she has been pardoned. After a judicial review found that there was reasonable doubt about the original convictions, she was released from a prison in Australia's New South Wales state. Folbig was serving a 30-year prison sentence, which would have expired in 2033. She would have been eligible for parole in 2028, and 5 years before that, she has been released. So what really happened? To answer that, let's take you back to the year 2003, when Kathleen Megan Folbig was convicted for the murder of her 3 children and manslaughter of her 4th. Folbig maintained her innocence. She said the children had died of natural causes. In 2019, an initial inquiry found the evidence, reinforced Folbig's guilt. But a lot changed after that. A second inquiry revisited her convictions in 2022, after new evidence suggested 2 of the children had a genetic mutation that could have caused their deaths. New South Wales State Attorney General Michael Daly has said that given all that has happened over the last 20 years, it is impossible not to feel sympathy for Kathleen Folbig. He said the unconditional pardon would allow Folbig to walk free, but would not quash her convictions. The children separately over the course of a decade, aged between 19 days and 19 months. Her convictions still stand for now, with the Court of Appeal still waiting on a final report from the inquiry that could recommend they be quashed completely. 20 years is a long time. Kathleen Folbig has spent all those years behind bars. She has been pardoned and has walked free, but has lost 2 decades of her life. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
US and India discuss ways to build stronger security cooperation with a clear focus on China's growing expansionism in the region. US and India finalize a plan to fast-track cutting-edge technology cooperation and co-production in multiple military areas during US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's New Delhi visit. Iran is all set to reopen its embassy in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday following a 7-year closure, reports AFP. The move seals a historic Chinese brokered rapprochement deal announced in March. Russia's Pacific Fleet forces have started operational exercises in the waters of the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk that will last until June 20th. This is according to Russia's defense ministry. The ministry said that more than 60 warships and support vessels, about 35 naval aviation aircraft, coastal troops and more than 11,000 military personnel are involved in the exercise. The European Union is pushing online platforms like Google and Meta to add labels to text, photos and other content generated by artificial intelligence. It has called for the labels to step up the fight against false information. The Taliban have now banned men from shaving their beards in Herat. In its latest diktat, they have restricted barber shops in a western Afghan province from shaving, trimming or styling beards. Authorities in Senegal have blamed subversive elements for violent protests in the capital. Senegalese police said that the number of people killed in days of clashes between police and supporters of opposition leader Ousmane Sonko has now risen to 16, with a total of 500 arrested. The Western Canadian provinces of Alberta and British Columbia have been dealing with unusually warm spring this year that has sparked several out-of-control wildfires. Firefighters in British Columbia performed a planned ignition to contain the wildfire that has burned through an estimated 241,214 hectares. As of Sunday, there are 67 active fires in British Columbia, 11 that began in the last 24 hours. At least 5 people died and another 8 were injured on Sunday when 3 men opened fire inside a house in Guayaquil, one of the cities hardest hit by crime and drug trafficking in Ecuador. The authorities have not specified the reasons for this new attack. Norway's Viktor Hovland clinched his 4th PGA Tour title with a playoff victory at the Memorial Tournament in Dublin, Ohio. American Denny McCarthy missed the chance to claim victory. And he was then denied by Viktor Hovland, who stealed the win on the first hole of the playoff. The Miami Heat have leveled the NBA Finals against the Denver Nuggets. Miami came back from 15 points down in the third quarter to beat the hosts 111-108 in Game 2. The best-of-7 series now heads to Miami for Game 3 and 4.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas tonight. We are leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.